Usually, when you apply for a mortgage or you put your name in for a promotion at work, you picture a human manager holding the pen. You know,
Yeah.
you picture a face to the decision.
Right, yeah, a person sitting across a desk from you.
Exactly. But what if the entity deciding your future isn't a person at all?
Mm-hmm.
What if it's just a locked, soundproof box that you literally aren't allowed to question?
I mean, that is a pretty unsettling thought.
It really is. And today we are looking at a shift that totally shatters our understanding of organizational power. Our mission on this deep dive is to explore a single, heavy-hitting academic paper.
Yeah, it's called Legitimizing Algorithmic Authority, a leadership framework for AI governance by Dr. Jonathan H. Westover.
And the core argument here, it completely flips the script on how we view technology. I mean, we tend to treat AI like a really fancy calculator.
Totally. We view it as like a piece of software you simply install to make a process run faster.
Right. But this source argues we have that entirely backward. AI isn't just a tool anymore. It has actually become a new form of organizational boss.
And, seeing it as a boss changes the entire equation of how organizations deploy and manage it. The paper introduces this concept of algorithmic authority.
Okay, so to understand how to govern AI, we have to look at what it has morphed into, right?
Exactly. I mean, artificial intelligence has fundamentally evolved from a support function like something meant to help a human worker assemble a report a little quicker.
Right.
It's evolved from that into actual decision infrastructure. These algorithmic systems are now the ultimate entities determining creditworthiness, hiring eligibility.
Wow.
Yeah, and even who gets targeted for social benefits. And it's happening at a scale and speed that human beings simply cannot oversee directly anymore.
Okay, let's unpack this with a visual because the shift is just massive. Imagine walking into your office and instead of your department manager's desk, there is just that locked, soundproof black box sitting there.
Just humming away.
Exactly. In the old days, if a bank denied your small business loan, you could walk up to the desk, look the loan officer in the eye and ask, hey, why didn't I get this?
You could argue your case. You could provide context, like explaining a gap in your employment.
Yeah, precisely. Today, you are effectively sliding your paperwork under the door of a box that just spits out a yes or a no. And there is no handle on the door to get inside.
Which reorganizes institutional power entirely. What's fascinating here is that Dr. Westover identifies that the core problem isn't the computational technique inside the box.
Wait, really? It's not the math?
No, I mean, the math might be brilliantly executed. The architecture of the neural network might be totally flawless.
Oh, I see.
The danger is the authority that the algorithm wields without the traditional human accountability we rely on in society.
Because decisions requiring nuanced human judgment usually come with a paper trail.
Right. And someone to blame. And a formalized way to contest the outcome. But now those were reduced to invisible computational procedure.
The paper actually talks about how this creates new regimes of visibility and invisibility.
Oh, yeah. That part is crucial.
The algorithm classifies who is deserving, who is trustworthy, and who is too risky. It renders certain traits visible to the company while ignoring others entirely.
Like we said before, a human manager might see a gap in your resume and ask you about the personal resilience it took to care for a sick family member.
Right, they see the human element.
But the algorithm, it just sees a negative variable, and these classifications have massive material consequences for you.
Deciding who gets a house, who gets a job interview, or who gets welfare resources to literally survive.
And the rush to adopt this technology is, well, it's vastly outpacing the governance of it. Organizations see the efficiency of the black box, they realize it can process 1 million applications in a fraction of a second, and they just install it everywhere.
Because it promises incredible scalability.
Exactly. I mean, if a government agency or a corporation is facing severe budget cuts, automating the initial screening process seems like the obvious solution.
So they deploy the infrastructure before establishing any accountability structures or recourse pathways for the people whose lives are altered by those decisions.
Yeah.
So we are essentially installing the boss without giving it a human resources department to report to.
That is a great way to put it.
And when researchers and developers try to implement ethical AI frameworks to keep these systems in check, they run into a massive roadblock.
They really do. The text argues this failure hinges on a profound flaw in our thinking. We assume the real world is as clean and orderly as a testing laboratory.
Which it definitely is not.
Far from it. Current responsible AI frameworks usually articulate very noble normative goals.
And by normative goals, you mean things organizations feel they ought to strive for.
Right. Ideals like fairness, absolute transparency, measurable accountability. But achieving those ideals relies heavily on an underlying assumption of stability.
Which is the myth, right?
Yeah. The frameworks assume you have a completely reliable technological infrastructure, coherent regulations that do not contradict each other, and a public that fundamentally trusts the institution wielding the technology.
But the real world is chaotic. It's messy. Dr. Westover breaks this down into 3 specific types of volatility that just wreck these clean, laboratory-style ethical frameworks.
Let's start with the physical foundation.
Right. The text calls this intrastructural volatility. Let's look at that first.
So, when an AI model is tested in a sterile lab, the internet never drops. The power supply never fluctuates.
The data feeds are completely pristine.
Exactly. But in the real world, these systems depend on a brittle web of internet connectivity, physical data infrastructure, and third-party identity verification systems.
So if an algorithmic system is deployed in a region with inconsistent connectivity,
You get massive monitoring gaps. The data quality degrades in real time, feeding garbage into the decision-making engine.
I want to drill into the human cost of that infrastructural failure for a second, because the text points out how this physical fragility compounds exclusion for marginalized groups.
Groups who are already underrepresented in the training data.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly. Imagine a city using a welfare targeting algorithm that requires applicants to respond to automated digital prompts.
Okay.
If a specific neighborhood experiences frequent internet outages, or maybe they rely on older mobile devices, the algorithm isn't going to recognize a structural infrastructure problem.
No, of course not. It's just going to classify those individuals as unresponsive or ineligible.
Right. The physical tech fails, but the human being pays the price.
And if the infrastructure itself is breaking down, a rigid bureaucratic rulebook is not equipped to handle the fallout.
Which creates a massive headache on the regulatory side.
It does, which introduces the second dimension, institutional volatility. This encompasses regulatory uncertainty, fragmented oversight, and constantly shifting enforcement priorities across different borders.
Right, because organizations find themselves navigating incomplete rules. Like, a multinational company might deploy an algorithmic boss across 5 different countries.
And the compliance thresholds for data privacy and algorithmic fairness in each jurisdiction are a constantly moving target.
It turns governance into a purely performative exercise.
Yeah, performative governance means you are just checking boxes for a regulation that might change next week, purely to avoid fines.
So the compliance team focuses on producing documentation for the auditors rather than actively ensuring the system is operating safely for the people on the ground.
Exactly.
Wait, let me challenge the underlying premise of this problem for a second.
Okay, go for it.
Let's say the infrastructure holds up perfectly and the regulations are clear. If a tech company just builds a mathematically flawless, perfectly accurate algorithm, doesn't that automatically fix the third type of volatility? Sociopolitical volatility.
You would think so, but no.
Really? If the math is perfect and the predictions are flawless, shouldn't the public inherently trust the system?
The research shoots that idea down completely. Sociopolitical volatility reflects contested legitimacy and highly politicized interpretations of what fairness even means to different groups.
Oh, I see.
Even if an organization deploys a highly accurate, technically sound system, it will still provoke massive public backlash if people perceive it as an instrument of surveillance or data extraction.
So accuracy is absolutely not a substitute for legitimacy.
Not at all. If a community feels an algorithm is spying on them or exploiting their data, it doesn't matter to them if it is 99% accurate in its predictions.
They will just reject the authority of that algorithm entirely.
Because those systems are operating in a highly volatile world rather than a stable one, relying on those static, performative compliance checklists causes tangible damage.
Real-world harm.
Yeah, the consequences hit both the stakeholders on the receiving end of the decisions and the organizations deploying the technology.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Let's look at the stakeholder side first, because the text brings up this devastating concept of exclusion without explanation.
Going back to our locked, soundproof box metaphor.
Yes. This is the moment you slide your job application under the door, and the box spits out a rejection slip with no notes.
You have zero insight into why the decision was made. You don't know if your credit score was too low, if the formatting on your resume threw off the automated scanner, or if the algorithm penalized you based on your zip code.
And more importantly, you have no actionable way to improve your prospects for the next time you apply.
Right. The opacity itself becomes a psychological harm alongside the material disadvantage of losing out on the job or the loan.
It gets even worse if you try to fight the decision. The paper calls this recourse futility. You want to challenge the black box. You slide an appeal paper under the door.
And the organization might nominally offer an appeals process on their website, but practically, it's a dead end designed to exhaust you.
The explanations provided in response to an appeal are often full of technical jargon that non-specialists cannot possibly decode.
Or perhaps you file the appeal, only to realize you are submitting a form to another automated system that never overturns the original output anyway.
The text refers to this as performative contestation, providing the illusion of a fair hearing without any real mechanism for reversal.
The algorithm ends up reproducing historical patterns, but it wraps them in a guise of objective mathematical assessment.
It systematically disadvantages populations already experiencing structural inequity. The source actually cites predictive policing systems that concentrate enforcement in already overpoliced communities by relying on biased historical arrest data.
It also points to credit algorithms denying access to populations historically excluded from traditional finance.
And the fallout is not purely a moral or societal issue, right?
Yeah.
It creates direct financial and operational crises for the organizations themselves.
Oh, absolutely. The text discusses operational brittleness. When a company over-relies on a centralized algorithmic system without building in redundancy or maintaining human oversight, any failure creates massive service disruptions.
Like a data pipeline breaking or a predictive model drifting out of calibration.
Yeah. The whole operational pipeline halts because the human workers no longer know how to process the decisions manually.
Organizations are also walking blindly into regulatory buzzsaws. The paper brings up the European Union's AI Act as a prime example of rapid regulatory intervention.
Companies that treated governance as an afterthought or just a box to check before launch are suddenly discovering that playing catch-up with compliance is exponentially more costly.
Because they have to re-engineer their entire data architecture.
Exactly. And furthermore, when communities perceive these systems as discriminatory, you get a total collapse in organizational legitimacy. Trust reserves deplete rapidly.
And when a scandal hits, and the PR department eventually releases a highly technical explanation to defend the algorithm, the public just interprets the jargon as deliberate evasion.
There is an incredible irony here. Companies rush to adopt AI because they want to be innovative and competitive.
But by skipping the deep governance work, they actually create what Dr. Westover calls innovation constraints.
Right. By rushing to be innovative today, they stall their own future innovation because the public simply stops trusting them. They lose the basic social consent required to operate in the market.
So when an organization experiences a high-profile algorithmic governance failure, stakeholder resistance hardens against any subsequent AI deployments.
Regardless of the new use case, a community will actively block your next project before it even starts, simply because you burned them with the previous algorithm.
Wow. Okay, so if the lab-tested compliance models are fundamentally broken and the fallout is this severe for everyone involved, how do organizations actually govern the invisible boss?
Right, we need a fix.
This is where Dr. Westover pivots from diagnosing the problem to offering an actionable framework for leaders. He calls it the Sensing, Stabilizing, and Legitimizing Capability Framework.
Let's break down the mechanics of this, starting with sensing.
Okay.
Sensing involves anticipatory sense-making. Under volatile conditions, reactive governance like waiting for a problem to appear as a red flag on a spreadsheet is totally insufficient.
By the time a failure shows up on a conventional data dashboard, the harm has already become systemic.
Exactly. Organizations have to build redundancy into their monitoring systems to catch things before they scale.
And anticipatory sense-making isn't just looking at server uptime or quantitative metrics.
No, not at all. It means actively seeking out qualitative community feedback, diverse information sources, and civil society reporting to catch harms early.
Because the people experiencing the harm on the ground are going to detect the failure long before an internal metric registers a drop in model performance.
You have to listen to the whisper before it becomes a scream.
I love that phrase. Okay, so once you sense the harm, you need the capability of stabilizing.
Right. This involves creating minimum viable safeguards that remain operational even when the technical infrastructure wobbles or the international regulations shift.
And crucially, stabilizing requires very clear decision rights and escalation protocols within the company hierarchy.
Yeah, I want to understand the mechanism here. How does a company actually stabilize a system when something goes wrong?
Well, the text uses Salesforce as a great example. They created an Office of Ethical and Humane Use of Technology.
But this wasn't just a group of academic advisors sitting in a room making polite suggestions to the CEO.
No, the mechanics of the Salesforce example are vital. That office reported directly to executive leadership. It had its own dedicated budget authority, and it possessed explicit deployment veto power.
Veto power. That is massive.
Right. If you want to stabilize an AI system, you need to know exactly who has the authority to hit the pause button.
So if a product team is pushing an algorithm live, and the ethics office senses potential harm to a vulnerable population, they can literally pull the plug on the deployment in the boardroom,
The product does not ship. The authority is decentralized.
which transforms AI governance from a delegated IT task into a core strategic leadership capability. Non-technical leaders need sufficient understanding of these systems to ask the right oversight questions.
It cannot be siloed in the data science department as a purely mathematical problem.
Okay, so Salesforce proves you can stabilize the technology internally with veto power, but that doesn't mean the public trusts you yet. How do you bridge the gap between internal safety and external trust?
That transition requires the final capability in the framework legitimizing. This is the continuous organizational work required to design procedural justice and accessible contestability directly into algorithmic systems from day one.
It shifts the primary organizational question from, is this algorithm mathematically accurate to, is the algorithmic authority exercised in ways that sustain social consent?
Let me clarify procedural justice. Are we talking about giving people a clear, fair set of steps to appeal a decision, just like they would get in a real courtroom?
Yeah, giving them a way to pry open the soundproof box and actually be heard.
Mhm.
Procedural justice involves providing plain language explanations of how the algorithm works, multi-channel recourse pathways, and independent review mechanisms.
It ensures that individuals can actually defend themselves against an algorithmic decision without needing a degree in computer science.
The source provides some fantastic real-world examples of the mechanisms behind this legitimizing process. Microsoft, for instance, established an external AI ethics advisory board.
Right, but they gave that external board the authority to audit internal deployments and publish their findings.
That builds real credibility because independent external parties can verify the organizational claims. You aren't just taking the company's word for it.
The text also highlights the work of the Omidyar Network, which funded civil society organizations to act as algorithmic advocacy intermediaries.
Think about the power dynamic at play here. An individual person going up against a massive corporate algorithm faces a huge asymmetry in resources and knowledge.
Intermediaries step in to help non-technical people translate their lived experiences of harm into technical challenges that the organization is legally or ethically forced to address.
So the governance documentation isn't just a massive binder that gets written once during the testing phase and sits in a drawer gathering dust.
The text advocates for adaptive documentation.
Adaptive documentation treats governance as a living practice. When physical infrastructure shifts, when international regulations update, or when consumer complaint patterns change, the documentation and the risk assessments must be updated simultaneously.
Updating your governance shouldn't be seen as a failure of the initial design. It is a sign of healthy, active stewardship. You are adapting to a changing reality.
It is treating governance as a verb, not a noun.
Absolutely. Let's recap the journey of this deep dive. We started by realizing that AI is not just a tool. It is a new form of authority.
It is an invisible boss making incredibly consequential decisions about our lives, from the loans we receive to the jobs we get.
And we explored how the traditional assumption of a perfectly stable operating environment is a dangerous myth.
Because algorithms operate amidst constant infrastructural, institutional, and sociopolitical volatility.
When organizations rely on performative, checkbox compliance in this messy world, the fallout is devastating. It ranges from unexplainable exclusions and recourse futility for individuals to total legitimacy collapse and stalled innovation for the organizations themselves.
But there is a path forward. By treating AI governance as a strategic leadership capability, by actively sensing emerging harms through qualitative community feedback, stabilizing systems with clear decision rights and boardroom veto power, and legitimizing algorithmic authority through genuine procedural justice organizations can actually maintain the social consent they need to operate.
By understanding these dynamics, you are now equipped to look past the technology hype and critically evaluate how the systems around you are wielding their power.
This raises an important question, though, a provocative extension of Dr. Westover's research.
A little late, I think.
If algorithmic authority continues to replace human judgment across all sectors, and every organization is forced to design its own localized legitimacy infrastructure to maintain trust, what happens in the near future when two different AI systems, governed by entirely different organizational frameworks, have to negotiate a high-stakes decision about your life.
Wait, what do you mean? Like what?
Say, a hospital's resource allocation algorithm interacting directly with your insurance company's payout algorithm. When their governance frameworks clash behind closed doors, who holds the ultimate authority over you then?
Oh, wow. That is a staggering thought. The invisible bosses negotiating with each other while we wait outside the soundproof room.
It's something we are going to have to face very soon.
Well, keep questioning the systems around you. And remember, the next time a decision comes down from on high, it is worth asking whether there is a human behind the desk or just a lockbox. We will catch you next time.